Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you all to this edition of ADF Talks. In just a moment, we're going to be having, hopefully, a very candid discussion, a one-on-one discussion with one of the world's most influential figures in international diplomacy. You know, as Russia's longest-serving Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Sergey Lavrov has navigated the intricate web of international politics with not only finesse, but also with unwavering determination. I'm hoping that over the next 30 minutes or so, I'll be looking to delve a little bit deeper into some of your personal insights, sir, talk about some pressing issues that our world is facing, and some of the intricacies that have helped shape your unparalleled career. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the Minister of Foreign Affairs for the Russian Federation, Mr. Sergey Lavrov.
Thank you.
Mr. Lavrov, welcome back to the Antalya Diplomacy Forum. It's good to have you back. It's a pleasure and it's an honor. I'd like to begin by asking you your very broad assessment, something from 30,000 feet, of the current geopolitical situation. We are in a world where the balance of power is changing, the world order is changing, we're seeing the decline of perhaps globalization, a move towards a multipolar world, maybe an increased importance of smaller groups that had previously been neglected.
Well, thank you very much for your welcome and for the respect to the emerging multipolarity. I would speak Russian.
Okay.
Уважаемые дамы и господа, я нажал.
It is on, actually.
Вот он горит, вот, пожалуйста. Еще что-то сделать?
Red light means on.
Надо, нет? They believe I am stupid, you know. Уважаемые дамы и господа, во-первых, хочу поблагодарить турецкие власти за приглашение на Антальский форум. Я был здесь 2 года назад. В прошлом году, к сожалению, не удалось нам собраться из-за катастрофы, которая постигла Турцию. Было страшное землетрясение. Россия немедленно направила своих спасателей, необходимое медицинское оборудование, гуманитарную помощь. Сегодня президент Эрдоган вспоминал о том периоде. Многополярность – это действительно реальность сегодняшнего дня. Не потому, что кто-то вдруг решил бросить вызов Западу, а просто потому, что естественный ход событий, прежде физического развития, вывел на авансцену новые, крупные и мощные государства. Ну, у всех на слуху Китай и Индия, рост экономики которых рекордный, которые...
Huge. It's very fast, and they are discovering new modern technologies. For example, nowadays China is called a long-term challenge by the US government. They are considered to be a challenge for the US, but mention that China has reached today's results playing by the rules invented by the Americans with the support of other Western countries without the context of globalization, liberal market and honest rivalry and honesty in general. And when they do that, based on the rules and institutions that they've created, for example, International Monetary Fund, International Trade Organization and others, China is growing faster and faster, and China is stronger than them right now. And then they started to block the work of the International Trade Organization, and they have a lot of complaints, and these complaints are lawful complaints. We can see that there are some changes in the votes and quotes in the international funds, and we know that BRICS countries, if we consider the initial rules, those countries are supposed to have more votes, but it's not the case right now. So the USA have their blocking vote, but no, it's not working this way. And we should pay attention to the fact that rules of the liberal market were crossed out just at once when the United States decided to punish Russia for the fact that our Western colleagues about the catastrophic consequences of the widening of NATO to the east, of adding new countries, and we warned them that all those actions were unacceptable. The regime was unacceptable. You know that there was a change in the regime in 2014 in Ukraine. The regime changed and they decided to destroy everything Russian, the education, the language, the culture, everything. If you talk to someone in Russian in Ukraine, in a shop, in a grocery store, they can decide not to provide services to you. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine that English is forbidden in Ireland, for example, or French is forbidden in Switzerland, or German is forbidden in Switzerland? Nobody can even imagine that. That's impossible. But in Ukraine, all these things were done because people listened to the Western countries, and we applied to them. We wanted to put it back to order. We wanted to control the situation. We wanted to cancel these discriminatory actions because they don't even follow the constitutional rules of Ukraine, because it's written there that it's very important to respect the rights of Russians. It's even written like that, Russians and other. Today, President Erdogan and the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Turkey, esteemed Fidan, said that there is a big crisis in the international rule of law and the processes are disrupted. And we talked about different examples, but Palestine and Ukraine were the most common examples mentioned during those talks. And you know that all the mess that we can see in the world right now actually exists. All of us know it, but who is to blame here? The UN? I'm not sure. In case of Ukraine, the UN has done its job. And when the parties of the conflict in Donbass, after coup d'etat, and after February 2015 signed an agreement with a guarantee of Germany and France, the Security Council of UN accepted that agreement. They adopted it, they adopted the resolution, and they made it mandatory. And now we know that at the beginning, these agreements, nobody wanted to fulfill them. Everybody used to sign them except for President Putin, but they didn't want to apply them, didn't want to implement them. They just wanted to win time to send a lot of weapons to Ukraine. Those weapons were supposed to be used against Russia, and that was the case. That was true. All the things that you can see now supports the initial plan, and it shows us that there can't be any. They say that we should go to we should continue with Russia. That's what they say, and we know that NATO representatives had plans to establish their bases on the Russian culture in the country. Those lands, those fields, those cities where Russians used to live, Russians used to build infrastructure, roads, ports, etc. It's not the fault of the international society, no. The charter looks like an ideal document for today, but there is a principle expected by the West. It says that the UN is based on the rights of the countries. Can you give me an example of the conflict after the establishment of the UN where the participants of the process were equal. That was never the case. And as you can see, Minsk agreements, resolutions on Ukraine were also important in this process because the Western countries didn't consider Russia to be the country to be respected. And it was just a time. And a small part of the eastern part of Ukraine would have a right to speak Russian and teach their children in Russian and have their own police force, local police force, and they were supposed to be consulted when prosecutors and judges appointed. That was the initial plan. And it's the same, the things that now he wants to provide the same things to Corsica right now. It's even smaller than the autonomy existing in other countries with minorities. If we talk about Palestine, it's very similar. General Assembly of UN Council, the things were all the same, but the decisions were sabotaged, and mostly it was done by the US, and they continued doing the same thing. They stopped working with the international media. Union, Russia, and the UN were among them, and they started launching some secret negotiations which nobody knows anything about. And I'm sure that Palestine will not get a legitimate country, but we will see some like Palestine has been accepted to the UN, for example. It will be a good picture, but status quo won't change. One more example for you. The policy of the US and their allies in Taiwan, they say that they accept united China, but you can describe the relationship with Taiwan with Taiwan as an important country, and so the problem is the basis of the UN. The problem is that the Western countries don't implement the decisions.
Sorry for the slight delay, I was just waiting for the translation. Minister Lavrov, you talked about a lot. U.S. policy, NATO expansion eastward, the situation in the United Nations, Macron's comments, the situation in Gaza. We're going to get into all of that. But I specifically want to ask you, because the tone that I seem to have gotten from your opening remarks is it's action-reaction. I want to find out a little bit more where you see Russian foreign policies taking the country. Where do you see it? If you could paint me a picture in 10 years, where is Russia as a result of its foreign policy?
In the middle of us.
You know, President Putin. By the way, I think it's in the middle. The answer is in the middle. Yesterday, President Putin message to the Federal he explained and reflected our today's philosophy. For many years, the collapse of the USSR, of the Soviet Union, and modern Russia went through its establishment process. We believed in the things that the West promised us. We believed that everything will be okay. We believed that there are no rivals, there are no enemies. We are all in the same boat. We will be honest, work together for the common good. But it turned out that all of that was fiction. There are no equal rights. We didn't feel anything in the economic relations with the West. We tried to join the trade organization, and the European Union drank a lot of our blood, I can say. There were a lot of Russia and the European Union because we were very trade partners. However, all the economic steps, all the steps in were very problematic for us. And we were completely cheated on when we talked about security, equal security for everybody. This principle is written in a lot of decisions, in a lot of principles of security organization of Europe, OSCE, and since the summit, they talked about this principle, and the principle discussed numerous times on the highest level. And we saw in those principles that no country or a group of countries will try to dominate in the world. So with one hand, they were signing those promises, and with the other hand, they were signing their agreements, opening their territories, and breaking all the principles established in the OSCE. In Ukraine, I think you know how things happened in the country, how the regime changed, and how the regime was established by the U.S., and how they listened to the U.S. 100% the USA. And we know that there are officers, there are British people, there are French people. Those people rule the country. We know all about them. And that's the result we have now. Because Minsk agreements were not implemented. And when we saw that, when we spotted that, one more time we saw it's impossible to get out of this crisis, that Ukraine turned to be in its eastern parts. Because we used to think that it would have been possible to avoid the negative consequences twice during the period when NATO started widening territories and advancing. But then, let me tell you the dates. It was 2010 and December. During that time, the West rejected our offered them to apply the agreements, apply the political declaration on the highest level, and they rejected that offer. And we said that our relationship with Ukraine is not your business. So the best thing what can be done is some limitation of the missiles, long-range and middle-range missiles. Maybe we can talk about the limitations on their usage. That was the only thing discussed. Although that organization was the most important place where all those people initially made. That's why this structure, this organization, it doesn't mean anything to us because we can't trust it, we can't rely on it, and the process of consensus is totally disrupted in this organization. Also, we see the people in power who take sides. And for many years in Ukraine, there were decisions made to destroy Russian culture, Russian education. During all those years, OSCE silent, just like the way they did for dozens of years before that, about Latvia and Estonia, about the non-citizens, ethnic Russians who voted for independence of those countries. They can't become the citizens of those countries. Do you know about that? Now they go because they're ethnically Russian, but everybody keeps. And let's say we have an initiative, or let's say the perception of the reality that we see nowadays, the meaning the meaning of the cooperation on the participation of the countries, the participants of which are here today, and the basis for this process helps us establish the relationship, for example, between Shanghai Cooperation Organization, ASEAN, SHOS, and others. We see great perspectives here, and we think that, for example, different organizations from Gulf countries, the League of Arab Countries, and other organizations from the Gulf countries can attend this process. Useful for all of us. But if the other countries from the European Union see they're in a deadlock, maybe they will change their mind if they understand that they don't have any responsibility, they don't bear any responsibility, because they actually sacrifice their people, their nation, their citizens to the Ukrainian regime.
Так что евразийская безопасность – это естественный процесс. Тем более, что центр мирового развития сместился в Азиатско-Тихоокеанский регион, прежде всего
of the world has moved to the southern and Western Asia. Eurasia is the engine of the development of the world right now. Europe has lost its role. That's the way we see the future.
Mr. Lavrov, at the beginning of your answer, you said, of course, Russia is at the middle. I'd like to point out that Turkey is actually, if you open up Google Maps, Turkey is in the center.
Но в Турции есть некоторые карты, которые...
When you open the map, you say that Turkey is just in its heart.
You can see that there are some maps where they use the wrong colors to color Russian Federation, and the parts are wrong.
You briefly mentioned the French about 5 minutes ago. I want to ask you about a particular comment made by the French President Emmanuel Macron at the beginning of the week. He said when it comes to the issue of Western troops on the ground in Ukraine, he said, quote, nothing should be off the table, nothing should be ruled out. The United States has subsequently come out, quickly denied this, saying that this is not on the table, as the UK and Germany as well. You were asked by a TRT World reporter about a couple of hours ago what your thoughts on this comment was. I believe that your remark was short and non-verbal. I was wondering if you could actually comment on how this series of words has played out from a Russian perspective and the reaction.
Да, конечно.
Yes, thank you. Well, I don't think he misspoke. Macron didn't misspeak. When he said that, his workers rushed to correct him. But the things that he said has a huge impact on the European Union and the whole community in the world. Everybody rejected his words, but the employees of the President Macron and the new Minister of Foreign Affairs started saying that that's not what he actually meant, and maybe we can send troops to Ukraine, but they won't fight. They will just teach and train someone, and it doesn't mean that there will be a war between Ukraine and Russia, but maybe there will be, who knows. That's what he said. But the fact of sending troops, or the desire to send troops officially, was spotted there. We saw that. We'll say unofficially, they're already there. And they have... we understand that long-range weapons of Ukraine wouldn't have been able to use against Russian cities. We know that. We have a lot of evidence there. But after all the comments, after the speech of the President Macron, he said today or yesterday maybe, he said that he stands his ground and he rejected the words you had, I guess. But no, the President said something like we are not going to fight, but Mr. Austin, the Minister of Defense, when he left the hospital, it said that if Ukraine loses to Russia, then NATO will have to fight against Russia. That's what he said, exactly. There is a quote. This is the meaning of the quote. The exact meaning is this. That's why the thing is, it's kind of serious here. And at the same time, they keep blaming us for sending to states and our president. Even more, in Geneva, on the table, there is a joint project between Russia and China. It's an agreement about stopping weaponizing the space. It's forbidden to send weapons to the space, but the Americans block it. And then they started blaming us for that. And this is a very old game. When they wanted to cancel the agreement of anti-missile protection, then President Bush said, we have to fight against Iran and the North Korea. They have very scary weapons, which are a big threat to us. But that was a big mistake. But when they needed to cancel the agreement of medium-range and long-range weapons, they just did it. But before doing that, they blamed us. And they said, you have those weapons already. And President Putin sent his statement to all the NATO members, and he said that it's in Kaliningrad. They said that it's in Kaliningrad Oblast, and Putin made a statement and invited all the NATO members and suggested that they send the experts to Kaliningrad Oblast to inspect what we have there. And he asked them to return the favor and allow our experts to visit Poland and Romania, where the American anti-missile systems were established, and they could be used against Russia, because those ones are also included in the mentioned agreement. So the NATO members didn't even want to talk about that. They said, no, we're not breaking the rules, we are violating the agreement, we don't need to check anything, we know we are right. Well, so before canceling that agreement, they just said that Russia violated it first, although that was not the fact. And the main people who violated that were from the Western countries. So I think that the Americans are trying to find some reasons to use their weapons in the space. Anyway, our president made a statement and he said that it was stupid. That's exactly what he said. And those people who blame us for those military actions need to understand their responsibility, need to understand the population of the countries, the nations, understand what their presidents talk about. The presidents they vote for, by the way.
You made a statement of if Ukraine loses this war, then NATO will have to fight Russia. Earlier in the week, we have marked the second anniversary of what Russia has been calling a special military operation in Ukraine. When you look at the West's perspective, it is on the complete opposite end of that spectrum, saying that Russia has illegally invaded, blatantly disregarded the national sovereignty of a neighboring country. You know, at the beginning of this conflict, Russia had certain grievances and it had some certain objectives. NATO expansion towards the east obviously being one of them. And also the denazification of certain elements within Ukraine. But when you look at sort of some of the results of Russia's actions, NATO borders with Russia has increased by 1,300 kilometers, sir. I'm wondering what the end game for Russia is in Ukraine.
First of all, let's talk about the comment of Austin, which you started with. I just want to draw your attention to that. He said that if Ukraine loses to Russia, NATO will have to fight against Russia. That's what he said. I think it was on his mind. Because before that, people used to say, we can't allow Ukraine to lose because Putin will not stop and he will move forward, he will advance to Finland and Baltic countries and Poland. There was Austin's statement, but according to his statement, it's the thing. Because we don't have plans, we can't have them. Americans have those plans because they feel that they're losing Europe. For now, Europe looks like a victim in their policy of pulling Ukraine into NATO. And all the expenditures were moved to Europe. People's life quality is dropping and dropping, and the energy prices went up significantly. Although it wouldn't have happened if the Americans hadn't exploded the Nord Stream. So all this idea with Ukraine is not only against Russia. I think there was another purpose as well. They didn't want Europe to become a very strong rival, and they got what they wanted because Europe is not the rival anymore. All the industry, all the business is moving to the US. The conditions are way better there, and the energy is cheaper. That's why we should think about this as well. About the reasons of the current events, you know, those people who mentioned this idea, all the discussions, the idea about the fact that Russia next consequence of cancellation culture. It's cancellation of the years which we went through, the things we went through before the conflict in Ukraine. The Western countries said that on March 15, 2014. The history changed. They don't want to talk about the fact that there was a change in regime, and it happened on the next day when the opposition and the former president Yanukovych signed the documents on the regulation of faster elections and establishment of the special government before the elections. Remember that. And there are signatures of Poland, France, and Germany as the guarantor countries. And the following morning, there was a huge change in the regime. The opposition got a bill, and the person, one of the people went to Fidan, he later became the prime minister. So he said, congratulate us, we are creating the government of winners. Before that, they were going to prepare for the elections, create the national government, and now he's saying that this is the government of winners. Can you see the difference between those names? And then they said that they will cancel Russian language in Ukraine. But in Crimea, it was spoke. It was the main language for them. And they sent troops to Crimea to attack the parliament building. Of that peninsula said that we can't move forward with you. It's not going to work. We'll leave without you. They didn't attack anyone. The troops that came announced them to be terrorists and started attacking them. They burned 48 people alive. If they did so, they used war equipment to bombard Lugansk and other cities. All of these things, social media, were on TV as well. But everybody forgets about this part of history, especially the Western countries. They avoid it, they don't mention it. These are the events which led to the referendum in Crimea. They forget about the Minsk agreements, they forget about how they launched their operation, and then they said, please allow us to establish peace here. And then there were Minsk agreements. And then the signatories said that that was a trick. Actually, it wasn't. To send weapons to Ukraine, as I mentioned before. So all these things which happened before the major events are very fast forgotten, and nobody wants to mention them, although they were the reasons. And after 2014, we started talking to the French, the German, and say, guys, your ministers promised us to implement the regulation agreement, but the opposition cancelled it out. Please have an impact on them. Make them implement what they promised. Because we talked about the elections which were supposed to happen in 5 or 6 months. And they answered, the French and the German answered, of course, yes, we had an agreement, it was okay, I guess, not bad. But you understand, democracy sometimes can be flexible. You can face some unexpected things in democracy. For example, sometimes you have to kill people. I guess that's the example of flexibility that they mentioned. And that agreement was not used anymore because they didn't want to implement it. And I would like to add one more thing. Ms. Meloni, the Minister of Canada, the Minister of Foreign Affairs in Canada, said that if Russia didn't invade Ukraine, Hamas on the 7th of October last year wouldn't have attacked Israel. That's what she said. That's a quote. Look at that. I've heard a lot about I've heard a lot of comments made by female colleagues on the international arena, but this one is particularly interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting to see the correlation between those two events. Since we're putting the United States under the spotlight, I'm not going to ask you, Minister Lavrov, who the Russian leadership would prefer to see in the White House after... I'm not going to ask you that. I'm not going to ask you that. But I will ask you, in light of some of the comments that we've actually heard from Donald Trump, he said that if I were president, the war in Ukraine would end in 24 hours. And we're seeing also a growing reluctance within the Republican Party to continue funding their massive funding of Ukraine. I think it's in the neighborhood of $75 billion just by the United States. I'm wondering, do you feel that your frequencies with the Republicans are more in tune? That's the most diplomatic way I can ask that question.
Actually, President Putin has already answered this question, and he's done it several times. He's already mentioned who we would like to see in the White House, but the main thing he mentioned is the fact that we are ready to work with any president which will be elected by the Americans if this president is ready to work on the basis of equal rights, honesty, without some dishonest attempts to get something from us and not change anything in their policy in return. These are the things which were said yesterday during the discussion, and there was some suggestion of the Americans to restore the dialogue on strategic stability, but it was based on the agreement of strategic war, I guess, but it's written in the beginning, at the beginning of the agreement, that the main things here are transparency, trust, honesty, etc., and all the other things come later. But the Americans say, let's restore the strategic stability dialogue, but let's start making inspections. These inspections are actually mentioned in the agreement, but those inspections were negotiated within the context of the relationship mentioned at the beginning of the agreement. But they say the beginning of the agreement doesn't matter. Who cares about that? Why wouldn't we care? It's the agreement. It's also important. I can't understand how they can be serious about really asking to visit our strategic objects after some long-range weapons launched by Ukraine to us against our strategic airports. But they couldn't have been done without the participation of American specialists. We know that. Also, modernization of the missiles themselves, of course, couldn't have been done without the Americans, because now they are long-range. And these things were mentioned by our president. And he said that they ask for what they want from all the sides, through the Minister of Foreign Affairs, other structures, other organizations, but just to get what they want and give nothing in return. That's the fact. Actually, we are not expecting any changes, to be honest. We don't think that there will be any changes as the result of the elections in the U.S. If we talk about President Trump, he's been a president already, and there were huge sanctions as well. Sanctions were kind of heavy. They were difficult. Biden's administration is even worse. But Obama started that, to be honest. Before Trump's inauguration, Obama sent our diplomats with their families and children, 120 people in total. So it was right before the New Year's. He deported them. Yep. He sent them to their countries on the day when there were no direct flights between Washington and Russia, right before the New Year's Eve. So they had to take buses to go to New York in horrible weather conditions. Those things were done on purpose. And of course, these things continued with other presidents.
There's a lot to talk about, so I'd like to sort of maybe switch gears. Making a reference to that Western official saying that if Russia had not invaded Ukraine, then Hamas would have attacked Israel. I want to talk about Israel's war on Hamas. Moscow has openly stated that the reason why the region is in this predicament is because of, I believe in the words of President Putin, Washington's monopolization of the settlement process. I think those were the exact words that he used. I'm wondering what position the Russian Federation is willing to take in terms of bringing a sustainable and viable solution besides the open condemnation of what Hamas did or what the Israeli army is doing now. What concrete actions is the Russian Federation ready to take?
You know, we've been talking about these things for dozens of years, and when I worked in the UN with my Israeli colleagues, we used to chat unofficially, and we always tried to push them to do something constructive to create Palestine. It was more than 20 years ago. Back then, it could be possible to imagine this country on the map. However, now there is no life spot there, even on the western coast. Everything is covered by the illegal Israelis. Nobody accepts them in the world, including the US. But back then, more than 20 years ago, we could have seen the borders, and they would include the west coast and Gaza as well. And I was criticizing them for being not flexible enough. And I used to say that this Palestine problem and the fact that it's not being solved is the main factor which feeds extremism in Palestine and in those Arab countries. And they used to get upset and get offended, and they used to say, oh, those are terrorists, you have to apply force, use force against them. There is no other way. That's what they used to say. But I think that the estimation of the influence of the Palestinian matter, the matter that is not solved, is shared by the majority of experts, and other meetings, negotiations also support that. Also, with this horrible terrorist attack happened against Israel, an attack on Israel by Hamas. Everybody condemned this terrorist act. But then we saw the military operations, and it was a horrible punishment, collective punishment. We couldn't accept that either. You remember Antonio Guterres? He condemned the attack on October 7th. He said that you should understand that this attack didn't happen in the vacuum. And this is what we see now. And how did the Israeli representative in the UN react? He said that Guterres should be fired, the UN should be shut down. That's what he said. It gave me the feeling that he felt that he is not guilty. He is not the one to blame. He did nothing wrong. That's what he thought. And now the Netanyahu government members started the war or operation. They said that Palestinians are animals. They're not people, they're animals. That's what they said. And Kiev regime, by the way, if you think about that one, that's what they say about Russians. They say that Russians are not people, not humans. They say creatures. Their prime minister, Zelensky, said that a long time ago when there were Minsk agreements and some shootings, but still they had a chance to implement the agreements. Before our special military operation, they asked him, how do you see the people on the other side? And he, as an actor, you know he's an actor, he said, there are human beings and there are creatures. And if people who live in Ukraine and feel that they have some connection with the Russian culture, get out of Ukraine for the sake of your future, for the sake of the future of your children. Go to Russia and get out of Ukraine. That's what he said. And there was the same statement about Palestinians, calling them animals. And a lot of international politicians wanted Israelis to adapt their operation and change it a little bit because there were a lot of civilians in the country. And he said there are no civilians. All of them in Gaza, all of them are extremists starting from the age of 3. That's crazy. You can never forget this age. That's why on October 7th the operation of Israel started, and on the 15th we saw all the horrors going on in Sector Gaza, all the civilians being killed. We immediately offered resolution to ceasefire, and then Brazilians tried to do the same, and now in January, in February, the same resolution was tried to push through by the Algerians, and Americans vetoed it again, and the British guys didn't support it, and the other people supported it. I think it's the most important thing to stop the people keep dying. By the way, I have some statistics here. It's very the statistics. For the period of the Ukrainian events after the change of the regime in 2014, so starting from 2014 till now, if we talk about the civilians, according to different estimations, according to the UN estimations, approximately 13.5 or 16.5 thousand people were killed. In less than 5 months of the conflict in Gaza, 30,000 people were killed. In Ukraine, there are approximately 17 or 27% of wounded, injured people for 10 years. But in 5 months in Gaza, there are 70,000 injured people in Gaza. And these numbers keep growing every day. You know, today I read something, and we worked with Russia, the UN, the US, and the European Union. We worked together, the four of us, and we wanted to be a full member of this group, and we wanted to represent some Arabic countries, involve them in this group. But the Western countries didn't want to accept them. The European Union, the US didn't accept them. Sometimes we had some extra meetings with the Arabic colleagues after our meetings, main meetings, and informed them about the decisions, but they were never accepted as full members. And I guess it was approximately 30 years ago, maybe in 1995, if I'm not mistaken, maybe in the 90s. So the four of us drafted a roadmap to establish Palestine. There were several stages, transparent stages, which could be checked. And all the process had to take 1 year, and it was supported by the Council, the UN Council. But it went to archives. And, you know, the Americans said that they were busy. They didn't want to continue working in this group of four. They slowed it down 5 years ago, and then they stopped the meetings completely, and they monopolized the mediatorship, as you know. I mentioned that. So what do? They try to make some decisions, conduct some negotiations, but it's not transparent. Sometimes they meet in Paris, sometimes they meet in Doha, and they ask their Arabic colleagues to accept them with their offers, and then we get this information from our friends in several countries, and you can find the information on the internet as well. And first of all, the main thing is how to exchange hostages, Palestine, Israel, etc. In the Israeli prisons, there are women and children, most of all. Did you know that? And the Arabic people say that, yes, this is important, the ceasefire is important, we have to exchange hostages. And the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia said that we won't invest money in Gaza restoration because there is no life spot left there. If there is no strong and working Palestine, a real country. And I already said, looking at the map, that we have to dislocate a lot of people who live on those territories to be able to establish such a country. But one of the versions which is being discussed these days is the fact that the Americans are trying to convince the Palestinians and the Arabic people to make peace with the current situation on the ground, and that the Palestinians won't have any extra land. And in return, the General Assembly and the UN Council will adopt the resolution saying that Palestine becomes a full UN member. A very pretty picture with no content. It's completely unsatisfactory. And yesterday or the day before that, we had a meeting with the representatives of all Palestinian fractions, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and others. They have a dozen of them, I think. It's not the first time we conduct this meeting. And somehow, in the State Department, their representatives, Vilish, his name is Vilish, he was asked what is his perception, what is his comment, feedback, and he said that all the Russian efforts in the Middle East were never effective. That's what he said. Well, everybody has its own perception of how to be kind and well-mannered, but what we do, we try to restore the Palestinian unity because Fatah and Hamas are separated. And other fractions are also separated, as you know. It weakens their position and they can't stand together against the external world. And our Israeli colleagues have mentioned several times when we asked them to continue negotiations with Palestine. They said, who are we supposed to talk to in Palestine? Abu Mazen is in the West. He doesn't work in Gaza. We don't have a party to talk to in Palestine. That's what he said. And we tried for many years, 5 years ago, and long before that, we gathered the Palestinians, and we said that the only thing which is up to you guys is to be together, is to stick together, be united. But we didn't even manage to put it in our communique. But the things which were discussed yesterday in Moscow were put in the official document, first of all. They mentioned that they were ready to respect the platform of the Organization of Liberation of Palestine. That's what they said. And even if it's not a motto for them, at least it will be a rule that they can follow to unite and stand together against the world.
Mr. Lavrov, I have one final question. I've been told by the organizers that we have to wrap up. Since the majority of what you said revolved around your time at the United Nations, you mentioned Antonio Guterres, you even talked about the adoption of a particular resolution. My question to you, sir, is given the amount of multiple and successive resolutions that have been vetoed at the Security Council, whether it is the United States when it comes to a ceasefire in Gaza, also Russia's veto when it comes to Ukraine resolutions. It seems to me, as a person from the very outside, that we are becoming increasingly dysfunctional. You talked about we have to become united, but we are not united at the United Nations. In 90 seconds, if I could from you, sir, as a seasoned diplomat, what do you want to see changed at this world body?
Должны просто наши западные коллеги отказаться от колониального мышления, отказаться от инициатив других, отказаться от исповедования высокомерных, по большому счету, российских подходов к международным отношениям. И мы упомянули нашу вето против.
Well, look at the approach of Russia in this. Yes, we have been vetoing some anti-Russia resolution, but none of them are actually legal. They did cancellation of Russia with legislations. I have already mentioned this. There are hypocrisy, there are double standards. For example, in Finland, for example, a big part of Finland can speak Swedish. If you cancel them, then this creates a huge problem. But in Ukraine, there are so many people, either ethnically Russian or speaking Russian, and they are discriminated and they are isolated. And therefore, the Western countries are now blaming Russia. And for this, we really implement veto. But when it comes to the Palestinians, when we say that don't kill Palestinians, they do veto and they say stop. They can continue to kill Palestinians.
Mr. Lavrov, thank you very much. I know that we have one question from the audience. Andrei? Can you get a microphone, please?
My question about education, about conversation between German officers about how they will be keep Crimea region, so on, so on. Can you comment on this?
Да, я сегодня тоже прочел то, что было выложено в соцсети и что было анонсировано утром Маргаритой Симонян со ссылкой на соответствующие источники. Вы знаете, конечно,
Actually, it was reference to relevant resources. On one hand, it is interesting. On the other hand, it is not. In the previous part, I have already expressed this. NATO member countries' troops, soldiers are already there, either as mercenaries or under different names. But there are a couple of interesting issues. Some German generals, there are some German generals they actually think about how to be smarter, how they can provide missile systems to Ukraine. The British or the Americans are already there, and there was this conversation: can we place the anti-missile systems in Ukraine without physically being there? And one of the generals said we can do it. And actually they know what they are talking about. And they say that there are civilians. I don't know how to express this, but so they are doing some things very obviously. I don't know how they can explain this to their own citizens.
I'm going to call it that because right now it's unverifiable, but they're actually quite explosive. Excuse me? Yeah, it is. Thank you very much. We have one final question. Yes.
Your Excellency, given the Congress of Deputies request, Your Excellency, given the Congress of Deputies request in Transnistria for assistance from Russia, what can we expect from Russia in terms of leadership to make sure this doesn't inflame into another request for annexation or further conflict?
Знаете, наверное, вопрос нужно адресовать тем, кто послужил причиной такого заявления Приднестровского парламента.
Actually, what is the motivation for such a declaration? That parliament, the regime in Chisinau, is actually busy with doing what Kiev regime is doing. They are isolating Russian elements and along with Ukrainians, they are making pressures on that part, and people are living there under pressure for a long time after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, and these people did not have any chance to go anywhere. I believe 200,000 people, they have Russian passports, and we have reacted against this, and we made a call to the Chisinau regime and the regime Prednestrovia said the Chisinau regime should stop blocking the negotiations, and there can be a negotiation in order to preserve first the rights of people there and also the territorial integrity of Moldova. So 5+2 can be the format of negotiation, and now the Chisinau regime is trying to cancel this format.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately we have very much overextended our allocated time. I'd like to thank the Foreign Minister of the Russian Federation, Mr. Sergey Lavrov, for his wonderful
Pardon. Ivan, dajcie się
Sorry guys, please. Vanya, иди сюда. Sorry, please let go, please. Wait. Hi.